In the turbulent history of the House of Windsor, royal sisters-in-law have rarely become close friends. Before Harry and Meghan announced their departure from the British royal family, rumours circulated within royal circles that the future Queen of the United Kingdom, Kate, did not have a harmonious relationship with her brother-in-law's wife, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Although both women dismissed the rumours of discord with a smile, speculation persisted. In terms of sheer malice and enduring resentment, no royal feud in history can compare to the late Queen Mother's unwavering 50-year rejection of her despised, twice-divorced American sister-in-law, Wallis, the Duchess of Windsor. Their mutual loathing was beyond words. Wallis once referred to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, as that fat Scottish cook. In return, the Queen Mother remarked, "People hate Wallis, and she hates this dear country. She should not be here." Moreover, royal experts claim that it was Elizabeth Beausoleil's influence as the new queen that led to Wallis being denied the style of Her Royal Highness when she married the Duke of Windsor in 1937 after Edward VIII had abdicated. Edward VIII reigned for less than 11 months, and the act of stripping Wallis of the Her Royal Highness title was questioned as potentially unlawful. Additionally, reports suggest that it was the Queen Mother who insisted that the Duke and Duchess of Windsor remain in permanent exile. When the matter was brought up in 1978, the Queen Mother merely smiled mysteriously before absent-mindedly remarking, "There can only be one king at a time in a country." The abdicated Duke of Windsor had once firmly claimed that he possessed concrete evidence proving that it was the Queen Mother herself who orchestrated the stripping of Wallis's royal status as a duchess. He also insisted that she was responsible for their exile to the Bahamas. In 1940, the Duke of Windsor was appointed governor of the Bahamas, and the Foreign Office explicitly advised local ladies not to curtsy to Wallis. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, once said, "The two people who have caused me the most trouble in my life are Wallis Simpson and Hitler." In 1937, after their marriage, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor embarked on a disastrous visit to Germany. The Duke was seen giving the Nazi salute, and reports claimed that the couple engaged in intense discussions with Hitler. After Germany fell, secret documents detailing the Duke's conversations with Hitler were retrieved and brought to London. Both King George VI and the Queen read them, and it was said that the Duke of Windsor was deeply concerned upon learning this. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace was bombed by the German Luftwaffe. Queen Elizabeth remarked, "I am glad we have been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." This statement elevated her to the status of a national hero. According to reports, when Hitler learned that the Queen had been practicing shooting rats in Buckingham Palace with a loaded revolver in preparation for a German invasion, he described her as the most dangerous woman in Europe. For more than half a century, Elizabeth Beausoleil, who held the titles of Duchess of York, Queen, and finally Queen Mother, had a long-standing feud with Wallis and the Duke of Windsor. The rivalry never ceased. A friend from a beauty salon in Palm Beach, Florida, once sent Wallis a box of powder named Duchess of York. Upon receiving it, Wallis sarcastically replied, "You know where I'll put it." Compared to Wallis, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's attitude was more refined but equally angry. She once said, "Wallis is so vile. A black sheep in a family is truly a curse." Some believe that the Queen Mother never forgave Wallis for being blamed for causing Edward VIII's abdication in 1936, as the king wanted to marry Wallis despite her being divorced. The Queen Mother felt that this led to her husband, George VI, becoming king after his brother's abdication and, under the pressure, dying young at 56. This meant she spent most of her later years as a widow. Queen Elizabeth and King George VI had once knelt and prayed that the throne would not fall to him. Shortly after her coronation, someone remarked to her that the former King Edward, now Duke of Windsor, who was in exile, no longer had bags under his eyes. She bitterly replied, "Yes, now whose eyes have wrinkles beneath them." Wallis and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, had already fallen out long before. The trouble began when Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales, broke all etiquette by bringing his new girlfriend, Wallis, to Buckingham Palace for a reception to meet King George V and Queen Mary. Biographer Michael Thornton wrote, "The Prince of Wales shamelessly introduced Wallis to his parents. Wallis curtsied, but King George V merely stared at her. The Duke and Duchess of York, Elizabeth, did not greet her warmly. She found Wallis's blatant, vulgar behavior and the bright colors of her attire deeply offensive. Wallis, too, was unimpressed. She found Elizabeth's sweet yet slightly sharp voice, her pink Scottish face, and her full figure very unpleasant. Experienced royal observers will remember that Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother herself, was once considered a potential future bride for Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales, and was pushed by her ambitious mother past him. Unfortunately, they did not get along. However, the Queen Mother held Wallis in great contempt, believing her to be old, unattractive, and divorced. She thought that if the Prince of Wales were to fall in love with a girl, it should be someone of noble birth like herself. But Edward was captivated by the worldly Wallis. Wallis was even allowed to freely use Edward's private residence, Belvedere Castle, a small castle on the edge of the Windsor estate. But then Wallis made the most serious mistake, Mr. Thornton wrote. In 1935, before Edward VIII became King of the United Kingdom, Wallis once mimicked the then Duchess of York, Elizabeth, with a tone that was harsh and full of sarcasm. One afternoon, Elizabeth happened to walk into the drawing room of the castle and saw Wallis doing this. She stood there in shock, having overheard the cruel and vengeful imitation of herself. Wallis imitated her voice and mannerisms with intense aggression. After seeing this, Elizabeth left angrily and swore that Wallis would never be forgiven by her. The feud between Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Wallis lasted from their first meeting in January 1933 until Wallis died in Paris in 1986. At times, especially in the United States, Wallis would have the upper hand, but not always. In New York, the Windsor family enjoyed supreme power. They had a permanent suite at the Waldorf Astoria Towers, reserved tables at El Morocco, received endless gilt-edged invitations, and their activities were covered extensively by the media. In 1954, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, visited New York and attended the popular Broadway musical The Pajama Game. One biographer wrote, "When she walked into the theater, the audience stood and applauded for a long time. She had to rise from her seat, tearfully waving in acknowledgement." This kind of thing never happened to Wallis. In 1967, after more than 30 years of estrangement, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor came to London to attend the unveiling of the Queen Mary Memorial on the Mall. Amidst rows of camera flashes and shutter sounds, Wallis and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, shook hands for a long time, awkwardly. According to protocol, during this public event, ladies were required to curtsy to the Queen Mother. However, Wallis did not follow this etiquette. When asked about the issue, she sharply responded, "Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, prevents people from curtsying to me. Why should I curtsy to her?" That day, their final words ensured that the animosity between them would never be resolved. When Wallis bid farewell to the Queen Mother, she shook her hand but still did not curtsy. The resentment continued. The Duke of Windsor passed away in 1972 at the age of 77, and Wallis attended the funeral held at St. George's Chapel in the shadow of Windsor Castle. It was a historic event, a solemn farewell to the only British king who voluntarily abdicated. Media from around the world flocked to witness the ceremony. However, Wallis's gaze was fixed solely on her enemy, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother did her best to comfort the grieving widow and made a special effort to appear polite. The Queen Mother reportedly took Wallis's arm and softly said, "I know how you feel, I've been through it myself." When Wallis was about to leave, the Queen Mother kissed her on the cheek, which surprised the courtiers. But according to Wallis's friend, Countess Romanwans, the Duchess described the Queen Mother's hat as having a white plastic arrow sticking out of it. She almost burst out laughing in front of the Queen Mother. It was so ridiculous, even though she was heartbroken. In 1976, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, made an official visit to Paris and planned to visit her sick sister-in-law, Wallis, one afternoon, but the plan was later cancelled. Wallis's doctor advised the Queen Mother's staff not to go, as the Duchess was suffering from dementia and paranoid delusions. The Queen Mother then sent her servant from the British Embassy with a basket of roses and a handwritten card. It read, "With friendship, Elizabeth." When the Duchess of Windsor, Wallis, passed away in 1987, the Queen Mother attended the funeral at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. However, it was later revealed that since the Duke died in 1972, the Queen Mother had been sending the Duchess friendly Christmas cards.